Hello and welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a while since my last video, so thank you so much for sticking around, and I'll try to update more frequently in the future. And today I want to talk about the Museum of Innocence by Orhan Pamuk, the Turkish Nobel laureate. Actually, I have just returned from a trip to Turkey where I visited the real Museum of Innocence in Istanbul. The museum was established by Pamuk himself to mirror this homonymous novel, and it houses a collection of everyday objects that reflect the life and times of the characters in the book. The story is set in Istanbul, spanning from the 1970s to early 2000s. The narrator Kemal is a wealthy upper-class man happily engaged to Sybil, a well-educated lady from his own circle. But as the engagement party approaches, he encounters his distant cousin Hüzün, an 18-year-old shopgirl, and becomes obsessed with her. So at first, I almost thought this was just another cliché story of love and betrayal. Kemal looks very arrogant and egoistic early on. He thinks he can perfectly handle the situation. He believes he can manage a double life by maintaining his engagement while indulging in this forbidden passion. And he even goes so far as to invite Hüzün to his engagement party. But after the party, Hüzün disappears without notice, leaving Kemal in a pit of pain and frustration. And far from forgetting Hüzün, his obsession deepens with each passing day, and he becomes isolated, he drinks excessively, and he develops the habit of spending hours in the old apartment where he and Hüzün used to meet. And Kemal's engagement with Sybil falls apart under the weight of his obsession, and when he finally manages to see Hüzün again, she's already married to a young filmmaker and lives with her husband and parents in a poor part of the city. Determined to win her back, Kemal believes enduring any humiliation is a worthy prize. He befriends Hüzün's parents, offers to fund her husband's film in which Hüzün wants to star, and for the next 8 years, she shows up for supper at Hüzün's place 1,593 times. During the years when the vicissitudes of life keep the lovers apart, Kemal begins collecting a vast array of objects, anything with a connection to Hüzün, from her earrings to everyday items like salt shakers and nutcrackers, to the 4,213 cigarette butts that once touched her rosy lips and entered her mouth. And these objects, kept, collected, and even stolen at times, becomes a solace, a way to feel close to Hüzün in her absence. Finally, Hüzün breaks free from her unhappy marriage and becomes engaged with Kemal. Their dream of a life together seems within reach. They plan a trip to Europe before getting married, but a car accident in Paris takes Hüzün's life, leaving Kemal missing her for the rest of his life. And it is after Hüzün's death that the idea of a museum occurs to him. He also turns from what he calls an oddball, embarrassed by the things he had hoarded, into a proud collector. Kemal's concept of time is central to his vision for the museum. He distinguishes between two kinds of time. One is the official time we share with others, measured by clocks, calendars, and historical events. And this time moves forward relentlessly, marking the passage of our lives. The other is the personal, subjective experience of time, influenced by our emotions, memories, and individual experiences. So while we live in a world governed by chronological time, Kemal believes our true experience of life is shaped by psychological time. So the museum becomes a manifestation of his psychological time. In a museum where all the objects representing his life story can be seen simultaneously, visitors lose all sense of time, which Kemal calls the greatest consolation in life. And that is why, although his family and friends think he has wasted his life, Kemal wants everyone to know that he lived a very happy life. And there is another interesting detail in the story. The protagonist Kemal invited Orhan Pamuk to write down his life story and help him establish this museum. And this is how both the novel and the real museum came into being. That's an interesting intertwinement between fiction and reality. And when I stepped into the Museum of Innocence in Istanbul, I felt like I had entered the fictional world of the novel. The objects were displayed in chronological order according to the chapters, and the first sentence of the book was printed on the wall. It was the happiest moment of my life, though I didn't know it. And beside it was the butterfly earring, the museum's first exhibit, and it was Füsun's earring, which she left in Kemal's old apartment during their first day together. But contrary to their fictional origins in the novel, the objects in the museum are real. They are real items that Pamuk collected from flea markets, from his friends' apartments, and his family's rooms where they kept old furniture. And actually, Orhan Pamuk conceived the novel and the museum simultaneously. From the very beginning, he wanted to create a love story alongside a museum where all the objects from that story would be exhibited. And the process of writing the novel and curating the museum was intertwined. So sometimes he wrote plots according to the objects he collected, and sometimes he searched for objects to fit the plots he wrote. And therefore, by visiting this museum, we also catch a glimpse of what life looked like in Istanbul between the 1950s and the early 2000s. Like Kemal in the Museum of Innocence, Orhan Pamuk was also born into a wealthy Istanbul family that witnessed the city's decline. And in his memoir, Istanbul, Memories and the City, he wrote, "The city into which I was born was poorer, shabbier, and more isolated than it had ever been in its 2,000-year history. For me, it has always been a city of ruins and of end-of-empire melancholy. I've spent my life either battling with this melancholy or, like all Istanbuls, making it my own." He used the word hüzün to describe this communal emotion shared by millions in the city. It is the Turkish word for melancholy, but it carries a more complicated meaning. It's a sense of loss and grief that's connected to the city's past glory, and is often tinged with a quiet resignation. And Pamuk wrote, "Offering no clarity, veiling reality instead, hüzün brings its comfort, softening the view like the condensation on a window when a tea kettle has been spouting steam on a winter's day." And I feel Kemal's attitude towards love somehow coincides with the hüzün of Istanbul, because even though his obsessive love for Füsun brings him so much pain, he never tries to move beyond it, and instead he chooses to indulge in this sorrow and even finds a strange comfort in it. And that's much like the Istanbulis who find solace in this city's melancholic beauty. And also, I think Hüzün is connected to the city's struggle between westernization and modernization on one hand, and nostalgic reverence for its imperial past on the other. In the Museum of Innocence, both Kemal and Sybil belong to the world of Istanbul bourgeoisie. They attempt to fashion themselves as modern and Western. They live openly together without getting married to somehow demonstrate their progressive attitudes towards love and sex. But Kemal's relationship with Füsun, who's from a less privileged class, seems to give him a stronger sense of obligation, because he sees Füsun as less modern and rich than Sybil. So I think this struggle between traditional and modern values perfectly reflects Istanbul's own struggle with history and modernity. And this struggle is also reflected in Kemal's arrogance and selfishness in his love for Füsun, because he tries every means to stop Füsun from entering the film industry, which reveals his deep-seated insecurity and a desire to control her life. And as he himself candidly admits, like most Turkish men of my world who entered into this predicament, I never paused to wonder what might be going on in the mind of the woman with whom I was madly in love and what her dreams might be. I only fantasized about her. And I think this fear of female independence is also a reflection of the broader patriarchal attitudes of the Istanbul bourgeoisie. So these are some of my major takeaways from this novel. Generally speaking, I think it's more character-driven than plot-driven because it focuses more on the detailed descriptions of Kemal's psychology rather than rapid plot development. And according to Pamuk, his goal in the novel is not to praise the greatness of love, and instead he portrays love as a complex and often painful human experience. He tries to analyze why people in love often act irrationally and why, despite knowing that their actions might not lead to happiness or success in love, they still continue with them anyway. So have you ever read this novel or visited the Museum in Istanbul? You can leave your thoughts in the comments below. And that's all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.